In the skies over the English south coast, the Battle of Britain is raging. Wave after wave of German aircraft are attempting to destroy the Royal Air Force. On the 16th of August 1940, a young pilot climbs aboard his Hawker Hurricane and is scrambled to intercept yet another enemy wave. This pilot began the day as a typical member of the few, but would end the day becoming the only RAF Fighter Command pilot to earn the highest award for valour, the Victoria Cross. This is the story of James Brindley Nicolson, VC, DFC. The journey to the skies over southern England begins 5 miles to the north of central London, in Hampstead. On the 29th of April 1917, whilst the world was still enduring the horrors of the Great War, James Brindley Nicolson was born to Leslie Gibson Nicolson and Dorothy Brindley. He received his education in the southeast county of Kent, firstly at Yardley Court Prep School till the age of 13, and later he would complete his schooling at the Eton Group Public School of Tunbridge. In 1935, he began working as an experimental engineer at the renowned engine manufacturer Ricardo Engines in Shoreham, West Sussex. But along with his keen interest in engineering, there was also a strong interest in aviation. Fueled by heroic tales of the flying aces of the Great War, James volunteered to join the Royal Air Force, and in October of 1936, he was enrolled onto an initial flying training course at the de Havilland School of Flying at White Waltham Airfield at Maidenhead in the Royal Borough of Windsor. Here, he set about earning his wings in the de Havilland Tiger Moth, and following 11 hours of training, he flew solo for the first time. A further 24 hours in the air would see him graduate, although his proficiency rating gave no clue as to the airman he would become, describing him as average with no special faults. Following his successful flying training, he received his Royal Air Force commission and rank of acting pilot officer on the 21st of December 1936, and was sent to RAF Turnhill in Shropshire to continue his Air Force training, flying Hawker Hart and Hawker Audax biplanes. 7th of August 1937, and the young 20-year-old pilot officer was off to his first squadron. Just 2 months earlier, 72 Squadron had been reformed at RAF Tangmere in West Sussex, following disbandment in 1919. Equipped with Gloucester Gladiator fighter aircraft, the squadron was relocated to RAF Church Fenton in North Yorkshire, and it was to here that Nicolson was posted. It was also where he would meet Muriel Caroline Kendall from nearby Kirby Wharf, and they would be married in Tadcaster on the 29th of July 1939. At the outbreak of war in September of 1939, Nicolson was by now a flying officer, and 72 Squadron had been re-equipped with Supermarine Spitfire Mark I aircraft. Tasked primarily with patrols off the British coast, the squadron found themselves being periodically relocated to RAF bases at Leconfield and Drem, before returning to Church Fenton in early 1940. In March 1940, Nicolson and 72 Squadron were again relocated, this time to RAF Acklington in Northumberland. However, it soon became apparent that the airfield there was not up to the task of operating Spitfires, and so on the 10th of March, 72 Squadron temporarily reverted back to Gloucester Gladiators until airfield improvements could be made. It wouldn't be long, however, until Nicolson found himself back in a Spitfire, as on the 15th of May 1940, he was posted to 249 Squadron. Like 72 Squadron, 249 Squadron had been disbanded in 1919 following the end of the First World War, but had recently been reformed, and although initially based at RAF Church Fenton, they would soon be off to their new base of RAF Leconfield to begin a workup period towards combat readiness. On the 30th of May, disaster almost befell Flying Officer Nicolson. He had been sent as part of a squadron detachment to RAF Acklington for 2 days of air gunnery practice. The journey north in his Spitfire was routine, but on the approach into RAF Acklington, for whatever reason, he omitted to fully lower his landing gear, resulting in a crash landing. Fortunately, Nicolson was unhurt in the accident, although his Spitfire was a write-off. And despite this rather unfortunate and embarrassing event, he was selected for training to become the squadron's air fighting instructor, and on the 5th of June was sent to RAF Northolt in North London to undergo training. Whilst he was away from Leconfield on the 10th of June, orders came through from headquarters of Fighter Command that the squadron was to be re-equipped, replacing their Spitfires for Hawker Hurricanes. On the 14th of June, Nicolson returned to 249 Squadron and was subsequently appointed the squadron's air fighting instructor as they continued towards combat readiness, achieving daytime operational status on the 3rd of July and nighttime operational status on the 9th of July. The same day the squadron was relocated back to RAF Church Fenton. As the war entered August of 1940, it was being noticed by the squadron that not much was happening up north, in contrast to the developing situation down south. On the 6th of August, the squadron commander noted in the summary of events, "There seems to be very little activity in the north now, but things are boiling up in the south of England, and attacks are being carried out by large numbers of aircraft on convoys and south coast ports. We are all hoping to get a move south." They didn't have to wait long, as on the morning of the 14th of August, a signal was received from Fighter Command headquarters stating that 249 Squadron were to relocate south to RAF Boscombe Down in Wiltshire. The Luftwaffe had commenced Operation Eagle Attack the day before, which would involve massive daylight attacks on RAF airfields as well as night bombing raids on ports and industrial cities. The Hurricanes of 249 Squadron, along with Nicolson and his fellow air crews and ground crews, were desperately needed to join the Battle of Britain. By the following day, the 15th of August, the squadron were at readiness and newly promoted Flight Lieutenant Nicolson was to be a section commander. Shortly after 5 p.m, reports came in of multiple Junkers Ju-88 and Messerschmitt Me-110 aircraft. 249 Squadron were scrambled into the air. During this interception, 3 Me-110s and 1 Ju-88 were shot down, although Nicolson at the head of Yellow Section didn't encounter any action. By the end of the following day, however, this would change. Nicolson would indeed get some action and become the only Fighter Command pilot to fly in the Battle of Britain and indeed throughout all of World War II, and earn the Victoria Cross. In the early afternoon of Friday the 16th of August 1940, British radar stations detected a large formation of German aircraft heading for Portsmouth. Fighter Command immediately reacted by scrambling Spitfires of 152 Squadron and Hurricanes from 1 Squadron, 43 Squadron, 601 Squadron, 213 Squadron and 249 Squadron. A total of 72 fighter aircraft were sent to repel the attack. At 1 at Boscombe Down, 12 aircraft of 249 Squadron were climbing off the runway and up to their patrol base of 15,000 feet. Nicolson was positioned as leader of Red Section alongside 18-year-old Pilot Officer Martin King as Red 2 and 29-year-old Squadron Leader Eric King as Red 3. As they were approaching position, Nicolson spotted 3 enemy bombers in the direction of Gosport and duly reported them in. Red Section was then instructed to break from the main group and engage the enemy. Just as Nicolson and his wingmen were diving towards them, he realised that they had been beaten to the fight by the Spitfires of 152 Squadron, and so broke off and ordered his wingmen to reform with the main group. As they were climbing back to altitude, Nicolson heard 4 loud bangs. Unbeknown to him, the attacking bombers had arrived with an escort of Messerschmitt Bf-109s, and they were taking full advantage of the vulnerable position that the 3 regrouping Hurricanes had found themselves in. The 4 loud bangs were the sound of cannon shells ripping through Nicolson's Hurricane. His Red Section wingmen had also come under attack and were hit. Squadron Leader King's Hurricane took some serious damage, but he was able to escape and made a forced landing back at Boscombe Down. He was unhurt. Pilot Officer King, however, was not as fortunate, and his aircraft was engulfed in fire, leaving him with no choice but to bail out. He successfully left his aircraft, but during his descent he came under fire from a member of the Home Guard, who feared he may be a German. He wasn't hit, but unfortunately his parachute canopy was, causing it to collapse. He made a very hard landing on top of a house in the Shirley district of Southampton, and he died on the lawn of the property. Back in Nicolson's Hurricane, of the 4 bangs, the first was a shell tearing through his canopy, injuring his left eye with splinters. The second had hit the reserve fuel tank, which was positioned just in front of the pilot, causing it to burst into flames. The third had come through the wall of the cockpit and seriously wounded his right thigh, and the fourth hitting his left foot. With the fire from the fuel tank worsening, Nicolson peeled away in a desperate attempt to avoid any further hits. Realising that he was in an unrecoverable situation, he began manoeuvring himself to bail out. With the fire worsening still and suffering serious burns, he struggled to slide open his shattered canopy and lift himself up into the airflow. And just as he was about to leave his aircraft, he saw an enemy fighter shoot out below and in front of him. Rather than make the jump to safety, he decided to lower himself back into the inferno that was his cockpit. Despite the level of destruction to his cockpit, the view out of the windscreen and his gun sight were relatively okay. He began a chase. Descending towards the ground at terrific speed, the enemy Messerschmitt Bf 109 turned left and turned right, trying to shake off Nicolson. But as soon as he was in range, Nicolson opened fire. Despite the chaos and the skin beginning to peel off his hands due to the fire, he was able to make a good number of hits, and he maintained this attack until he could take the inferno no longer. Satisfied that the enemy aircraft was fatally damaged, he made his second and successful attempt to abandon his aircraft and descended in his parachute. Later eyewitness accounts stated that the Bf 109 crashed into the sea. But he was still under attack. This time, he came under fire from another over-enthusiastic member of the Home Guard, who opened up with a shotgun, hitting him in the buttocks before he eventually landed in a field. Nicolson was in a dreadful state, with severe burns all over his body and gunshot wounds, and he was rushed to the Royal Southampton Hospital. Such was his desperate condition, he was not expected to survive the night. But he did, and began a long road to recovery. Following his emergency treatment at the Royal Southampton Hospital, he was transferred to the Royal Air Force Hospital at RAF Halton, and it was here, in November of 1940, while still recovering from his injuries, he received, to his astonishment, news that he'd been awarded the Victoria Cross. His citation in the London Gazette read as follows: Air Ministry, 15th November 1940. The King has been graciously pleased to confer the Victoria Cross on the undermentioned officer in recognition of most conspicuous bravery. Flight Lieutenant James Brindley Nicolson, No. 249 Squadron. During an engagement with the enemy near Southampton on the 16th of August 1940, Flight Lieutenant Nicholson's aircraft was hit by 4 cannon shells, 2 of which wounded him whilst another set fire to the gravity tank. When about to abandon his aircraft, owing to flames in the cockpit, he sighted an enemy fighter. This he attacked and shot down, although as a result of staying in his burning aircraft, he sustained serious burns to his hands, face, neck and legs. Flight Lieutenant Nicolson has always displayed great enthusiasm for air fighting, and this incident shows that he possesses courage and determination of a high order. By continuing to engage the enemy after he had been wounded and his aircraft set on fire, he displayed exceptional gallantry and disregard for the safety of his own life. Nicholson remained incredulous at his award, despite the delight and celebration of all those that knew him, stating that he was only doing his duty, and there were many others who were equally qualified to receive such an award. As a result, he became determined to be worthy of the Victoria Cross, and show as much by getting back into the air. Following discharge from hospital on the 23rd of February 1941, and to continue his recovery, he spent time on instructor duties, training Bristol Blenheim pilots on 54 Operational Training Unit at RAF Church Fenton, and later that year he became the commanding officer of 1459 Flight, operating Douglas Boston and Douglas Havoc multi-role fighter bombers at RAF Hibblestone in Lincolnshire. But he would return to action on the 4th of August 1943, when now Squadron Leader Nicholson arrived in Burma as the commanding officer of 27 Squadron. Here he would spend a year attacking Japanese forces, using Bristol Beaufighters and de Havilland Mosquitoes. He still had the determination to justify his Victoria Cross, and as a result, his outstanding leadership of 27 Squadron resulted in him receiving the Distinguished Flying Cross on the 11th of August 1944, the same day that he was promoted to acting wing commander and, much to his disappointment, reassigned to instructor duties with the RAF 3rd Tactical Air Force at Comilla in Bengal, instructing bomber crews. On the 2nd of May 1945, just a few months from victory over Japan Day, Nicholson's luck would finally run out. He was assigned the role of observer as part of a 12-man crew of a B-24 Liberator of 355 Squadron. The mission for a flight of 8 Liberators was to depart RAF Sulbani in West Bengal and fly across the Bay of Bengal to attack gun positions in the Rangoon area of Burma using 500-pound bombs. The aircraft all departed on time at 10 minutes to 1 in the morning and set a course over the Bay of Bengal. The weather was bad that evening, however, and Nicholson's aircraft ran into engine trouble. The number 1 engine caught fire, and so the captain, Squadron Leader Gerald de Souza, immediately feathered the engine and jettisoned their bomb load. Following sending a radio message that they were returning to base, the aircraft was turned around and a course set for a return to RAF Sulbani. Flying at an altitude of 3,000 feet and a ground speed of 135 miles per hour, the aircraft began to experience handling problems with a tendency for uncommanded roll to starboard. It was thought that engines on the starboard side were causing this, and reducing the throttle seemed to help maintain level flight. Unfortunately, this reduced thrust also meant reduced lift, and so the aircraft began to descend towards the sea. Squadron Leader de Souza ordered the crew to prepare for ditching. With the crippled bomber now just 200 feet above the water, it again began a roll to starboard, and shortly after, it crashed into the Bay of Bengal, 130 miles south of Calcutta. Only 2 crew members survived the crash, Flight Sergeant Michael Pullen and Sergeant Eric Kitely. Only 1 body was recovered, that of Flight Sergeant Samuel Doherty, and the remaining 9, including Wing Commander James Nicholson, were never found. The last reported sighting of Nicholson was from one of the survivors, who saw him give a cheery thumbs up sign before taken to his ditching station. On the 8th of May 1945, as VE Day celebrations were taking place, a telegram arrived at the home of his wife, Muriel, informing her of his death. Wing Commander James Brindley Nicolson, VC DFC, is remembered along with the other Liberator crew that were lost at the Singapore Memorial, and is also featured in many memorials throughout the Southampton area as a mark of remembrance and gratitude for his role in defending their city and country. In 2015, to mark the 75th anniversary of the Battle of Britain, an RAF Typhoon was repainted in the colour scheme of the Hawker Hurricane flown by the young Flight Lieutenant Nicholson, bearing the original 249 Squadron markings and flown alongside other aircraft of the RAF Battle of Britain Memorial Flight as an act of remembrance of the only RAF Fighter Command pilot to be awarded the highest award for gallantry, the Victoria Cross. Thanks very much for watching. Please take a moment to hit the like button and consider subscribing.